internal pressure to balance the budget.
Meanwhile, Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest natural resource companies, has indicated that the financial turmoil is starting to hit the commodities sector. According to the Financial Times, the warning represents a marked shift in industry sentiment.
Moving on to the International Herald Tribune and its article which looks into the U.S. efforts to unite the Syrian opposition so they could build a new government once the Assad leadership is gone.
And finally, according to the Irish Times, a children's Quran recital competition on the Islamist-backed radio station in Somalia has awarded assault rifles and hand grenades to the winners.
Makes you wonder. To discuss these, Juliet and I are joined by Bundeep, Rangar, the chairman of IndusView. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us. Starting with the Daily Telegraph and this very stark warning from the IMF that the world economy is teetering again towards recession. I think what is particularly revealing is they are saying that the European Union needs to get its act together. Almost a message that suggests this isn't just a failure of economic policy, but a failure of leadership as well.
You're absolutely right. What's missing is statesmanship here, right? And you've got the IMF, which in some ways is a European body, because you've always had the history of the IMF being led by a European, the World Bank by an American. Christian Lagarde now takes over from the inner sanctums of the political establishment in Europe, now in a non-political establishment, making an opinion that I'm sure is grounded in her previous experience as a politician. And that's the cusp of the issue. This is not purely a monetary policy solvable issue. This is a fiscal policy, and fiscal policy is a combination of monetary policy and political policy. What's missing is political will. And the danger right now is that Europe becomes the Lehman for the world. It's not just Greece being the Lehman for the Eurozone, it's Europe, given the fact that Italy got downgraded, Greece's debt crisis still remains unsolved, China stops trading with certain European banks like SocGen and BNP, that European outlook causes a nervousness in the market, and remember, the biggest fear is lack of confidence, and that's what's happening here right now.
And it's interesting that the opening paragraph to this article is talking about the potential for a lost decade, really predicating that on America, again, addressing this leadership and motive sentiment.
Well, I mean, you look at the U.S. downgrade as a result of the inability of the executive and the legislative parts of government to come to a common agreement in time. And you can look back at when Obama lost control of the House last winter as being a very significant and maybe underestimated point in terms of controlling the economy and controlling an agenda, and that political impasse in the U.S. leading to the IMF's downgrade to 1.5% GDP growth, and of course political lack of ownership in Europe, because who represents Europe? Which is the main spokesperson for Europe? We don't know. And that, I think, is contributing as much as austerity measures and cutbacks. And the danger is that we mistake the urgent from the important. The urgent stuff might be austerity and cuts. The important stuff is wealth creation and growth. And those two are in danger of being confused.
Moving on now to the Gulf news, again sticking with a similar theme here, the issue of growth. They're looking at the UAE and predictions there that it's going to growth in that region will increase from 3.3% to 3.8% for 2012.
Not surprising, right? Because you look at the continued high price, relatively high price for oil and gas. And within the UAE, of course, the majority of the economic output comes from Abu Dhabi, which is nearly 60-70% of the local GDP. So they've kept a high output. They've kept a high price point. At the same time, some of the inflationary pressures that were there, especially in places like Dubai, have come down because of the speculative bubble coming down.
They're inflationary elsewhere, though, in these weak economies. They're having to buy these goods.
But as long as the U.S. dollar now looks at a slightly rising price, because no more safe havens, so dollar prices rise, commodity prices go down, and oil prices remain high, generally speaking, that's a good thing for not just the UAE, but Iran, to some degree Iraq, any oil-producing country.
But even going back to our previous story, this does paint a fairly better picture, at least for that region. But referring to our last story, given what is happening in Europe and the U.S., it could still pull back even regions that could possibly perform a bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. So you look at the last recession, that's what the fear now is with the new IMF report of the worldwide recession. What pulled us out was the BRIC economies, China in particular, followed by India, Brazil, and of course Russia. This time around, not that easy. They're all combating inflation. They've raised interest rates, so that of course has crimped local growth. And when you have local growth coming down, on top of falling exports to places like Europe and America, which are of course suffering, you don't have the same rescue option from the emerging economies like the past.
Let's take a look at The Guardian. Berlusconi attacks the political downgrade. The S&P downgrades Italian debt. This sounds like a story we had a few months earlier, and it was Obama who was saying the downgrade is political. I mean, tell us something else. Prizes for originality, at least.
Absolutely. And the combined debt there, and I mentioned this some time ago, in Italy is greater than the other so-called pig nations combined, more than Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And the bigger problem with Italy, of course, is to some extent a lack of transparency. And when Italy is now trying to get a balanced budget by 2013, cutbacks of 60 billion worth of austerity-led savings, the question is, how can we measure that as being an effective tool and a successful tool in the absence of complete transparency? Not to mention the fact that, of course, Italy is a much larger economy than Greece and a greater contributor to the Eurozone, so the effects are far greater.
But I mean, you can see where Silvio Berlusconi is coming from, that yes, this is political from his point of view, but surely the much deeper point is that really S&P's, the other groups, they are essentially think tanks. This is an opinion, and yet opinion can carry so much weight. An opinion on somebody's country, an opinion on a bank.
You're right, but on the other hand, if you look at the downgrade from an A+ to an A, or for that matter, United States, well, it does increase the cost of borrowing.
And I see that, but I think the point as well is that it is still an opinion expressed by the equivalent of a think tank.
You're absolutely right. And which if it was purely academic, I would say, fine, that's an opinion, you can park it. But when you're trying to lead the world out of a recession, and countries like Britain or Germany, which have great credit ratings, want to finance growth, the cost of borrowing becomes important. And if Italy wants to revive the economy, again, that cost of borrowing, if negatively impacted by an S&P downgrade, has some ramifications. Of course, everything here has a political cost.
I suppose they were always willing to argue it's just an opinion when it is positive, when there's perhaps there are good signs of an economy doing well, and the reverse when it isn't. Moving on to the Financial Times, and I suppose this again is a sign of just how difficult things are. Orders for precious metals, for iron ore and the rest are actually dipping, so says the story from the Financial Times.
But you look here, there's a big silver lining, right? If you look at what was proposed just yesterday as Plan B to David Cameron's plan for growth and austerity measures, it's to build out infrastructure. You look at Obama's package, it's premised upon building infrastructure.
Yes.
Schools, hospitals, airports, broadband links, highways. Look at India, again, it's about infrastructure. Well, the silver lining is here is that with commodity prices going down, like Rio Tinto pointing out, precious metals and non-precious metals, oil prices either being stable or going down, things like cement become cheaper. The cost of infrastructure rollout is far less than would have been in a non-recession environment.
You can accelerate the program because these goods are cheaper.
Absolutely. This is, in some ways, a golden opportunity for countries to spend on infrastructure to boost their economies. Now, that doesn't necessarily lead to wealth creation. It leads to job creation, but certainly helps you get out of the mess. We proved that back in Truman days in the United States.
Moving on, this time to geopolitics. Plans reportedly by the United States should President Assad of Syria actually fall from power.
They're making that contingency plan, right? They've seen it happen in Libya, or almost happen in Libya, absolutely. And on the back of the whole change of landscape in Egypt, Tunisia, and now in Libya, Syria is one which is obviously different, right? So one of the big differences, of course, it has external ramifications. It's not contained within the country, unlike Egypt or Libya. It impacts policy with Israel, Lebanon, Iran. So the containment of this potential implosion is far more important, and that's where the coordinated action by Europe and the United States is incredibly important to prevent this from basically falling out.
Okay, Bundeep, just a few seconds left before we go to the break, but this is, I think, a really sad story if you look at it. A radio station in Somalia, prize competition for recital competition, and the first prize is
they had they had this a couple of years ago. Why give them the headlines? My question. Why exacerbate what already is a sad situation there?
Bundeep, Rangar, many thanks to you. Thanks for coming in. A quick reminder of our main news. The Afghan President Hamid Karzai is cutting short a visit to the UN in New York after his main representative in negotiations with the Taliban was killed in a suicide attack.
From me and from you, goodbye.
Sorry, Jimmy.